BDO, and the meeting is predominantly about Dean Care. Are we recording?
Yes.
We are recording. So thank you for coming. And I would like to start with a call to order. So this January 23rd meeting, I need a mover and a seconder. That's Dean and seconded by Bill Morton. So this January 23rd, 2024 regular meeting of council has been called to order at 6:12 p.m. And quorum has been achieved. We have a full attendance of council. So call it to vote. Steps that we, okay, that is carried. The next item on the agenda is just declarations of disqualifying pecuniary interest or conflict of interest. Are there any?
Just one question before we start. Did you check to make sure it was working with Robert?
You did.
Robert, you can hear us well?
I can hear you loud and clear. You hear me?
Perfect. He did put his hand up as
the vote.
for the vote, so I assumed that he was there.
Assuming does.
Any disqualifying or pecuniary interest? No. All right. So the next item on the agenda is that council accept the auditor presentation. Then move in a seconder. John Manson and Bill Morton. So now therefore be resolved that the Council of the Corporation of the Municipality of Calvin hereby accepts the auditor presentation of draft financial statements fiscal year 2022 as presented by BDO. All those in favor?
Oh, you don't,
Well,
the discussion
He's
first,
got to do
the
it, yeah.
presentation first.
I'll make the presentation. All right. I thought we were just voting to accept the presentation that he presented. Okay.
We didn't do it. Didn't do it.
All right. Well, then, Mr. DeCare.
Thank you. Your worship, thank you, members of council. So for those of you that I have not met, I'm Dean DeCare. I've been a partner with BDO Canada for a few decades now. And my area of speciality is non-for-profits, public sector, municipalities, upper tier, lower tier, as well as a number of provincial government organizations. So I've been doing external audits for over 32 years now. And very happy. It's my first time out here. I apologize for my tardiness. I missed kiosk and I went to Boundary Road. So, but I got to see the great township of Calvin in the dark. I'm going to walk you through a couple different things. So generally speaking, under the Municipal Act in Ontario, you're required to appoint, every municipality in the province of Ontario is required to appoint an external audit firm. That audit firm has a number of rights and responsibilities as it relates to reporting to the inhabitants of every township through mayor and council. In this particular case, we're going through the December 31st, 2022 financial statements of the Corporation of the Municipality of Calvin. Generally, I'd like to get in here in April. So 4 months after your year end. Right now, we're vastly approaching 13 months past your year end for a number of different reasons. Many of those reasons you're likely aware of as a council. We did have a changeover in council back in late, I believe, 2022. If I'm not mistaken, November 2022 was the last municipal election. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through at a decent pace, enough to give you comfort or enough that will allow for discussion or questions from you, either directed towards myself representing BDO Canada or to Donna if it's a question for management. So what we'll start with, I have a couple of different things to present, but what we'll start with is you have this, right? The financial statements themselves. So the financial statements of every township, based on my experience, are very important. They provide the foundation for filing what's called the financial information return. They're used by council in assessing a budget process. They're used by management as a tool for costing out the budget for running a township. They're used by the province of Ontario through the responsible ministry of all municipalities when they look at the FIR, audit financial statements, et cetera. They're also used by financial institutions when assessing cost of capital every time that you go out and borrow. They also should be provided to your insurance carrier as part of your annual fiduciary responsibility around safeguarding of assets. So these are some of the important things why you have an external audit done on an annual basis. And that auditor actually technically, can attend every single council meeting, in camera, out of camera, et cetera, under the laws of the province of Ontario. And the goal there is just to make sure that you're presenting transparent financial statements prepared in accordance with what are called public sector accounting standards. Those standards exist for all governments in Canada: territorial, provincial, Indigenous, local government, federal government, etc. So everyone uses the same accounting principles, much different than the private sector, okay, or the non-for-profit sector, which follow a whole different set of accounting standards and rules and principles, if you will, in Canada. So we'll start with my audit report, which is the first 2 pages of your financial package, your financial statement package. And again, it's a report that I write every year, and it's issued to all the members of council as well as the inhabitants, ratepayers of the Corporation Municipality of Calvin. In our opinion, in these draft financial statements, they have to be accepted by you, and then BDO has to, complete a couple final tests, because we're now 13 months past the year-end date that I'm reporting on. But in our opinion, these financial statements present fairly in all material respects, and I'll talk about materiality in a minute. The financial position and the results of operations and cash flows for the municipality of Calvin. The basis of our opinion: how do you conduct an audit, Dean? Well, again, after 30 years, we continue to conduct an audit in accordance with what are called Canadian General Accepted Audit Standards, or what we call in Canada the CASIs, okay, which is the Canadian Assurance Standards, which are a mere set of standards as produced by the International Audit, the International Assurance, and the IASB, the International Audit and Assurance Standards Board, that is based out of Europe. Other matters that I talked about in here, your December 31st, 2021 financial statements were audited by a separate or a different licensed public accounting firm who produced and who expressed an unmodified opinion on those financial statements back in June of 2022. Responsibilities: you have staff, paid employees through a CAO, clerk, treasurer, other staff in the township that are responsible for maintaining an accurate set of books and records, or what we call a set of general ledger accounts. In the municipal world, they're actually called municipal accounts. And they're responsible for making sure the day-to-day, they're making sure that bills are paid, checks are signed, EFTs are done, everything is authorized and signed off, tax bills are collected, government grants are applied for and collected, user fees are charged, budgets are set, etc. That's management's responsibility. The mayor and council in the municipal world are responsible for the oversight of the year-end financial process, as well as the conduct of the external audit firm, which is my firm. And then, of course, you have the external auditor on the next page. What's our responsibility? Well, it's to assist you in preparing a set of financial statements prepared in accordance with public sector accounting standards, to assist you with financial processes, to provide from time to time recommendations on how you do things as an organization, how it relates to your different financial processes and policies, and to conclude or provide an opinion on your financial statements each year. We also, over the past 10 years, 10 or 12 years, there's been a number of changes with respect to the auditor's responsibility with respect to fraud, illegal activities, going concern, subsequent events, etc., and items of that nature. So all of those things get built into the external audit, which require us to do different types of tests and conclude on those tests. Okay, and I'm going to be, I certainly will be prepared to sign off this report and attach it to your financial statements and assist you with the preparation of the 2022 FIR. And I'm going to date that on January 23rd, which is tonight. Now we get into the nuts and bolts of the audit itself. If we start on page 4, this is what's called the statement of financial position for the municipality. So this sets out your financial assets, your financial obligations and liabilities, as well as your what's called accumulated surplus, which includes municipal reserves. Okay, these are all important concepts for council to keep in mind. You'll see at the end of the year, we ended with a bank balance, if you will, and I think there's three bank accounts, if I'm not mistaken, but with $1,050,000 in it. The year before, you'll see was 647,000 with some term deposits of around 128,000. Why is cash up year over year? One of the things is that we continue to receive, or we again in 2022, I always say you as a township received some additional government contributions or government funding, and that can be OSIF funding, it can be gas tax monies. And you'll see some of those things in the notes to the financial statements that were received and yet to be spent. So they likely were deployed or spent or utilized in 2023. So after December 31st, 2022. So those monies were sitting in your municipal bank accounts at the end of December. Accounts receivable, $191,000 represents any user fees, government grants, and HST that is owing to the municipality of Calvin. Okay, at December 31st, 2022. And again, very comparable to the year before, 195,000. Taxes receivable, $230,000. So again, just, keep in mind, you have a tax base of, I think it's roughly around $1.4 million, $1.445 million. That's made up of about 50–60% of it's residential and a little bit of commercial. And then of course we have the pipeline, which represents a significant amount of our property taxation revenue on an annual basis. So that $230,000 is a little higher than I would like at the end of the year. My preference would be that it be somewhere around $140,000, which represents about 10% of your total property tax base in a year, your total property tax billings. And the reason that number can get a little bit higher is dependent on the timing of when bills are sent out. So when you send out bills, how you send out 2 bills to the community, the taxpayers. Well, you like to get those bills out so that the first installment is made by June 30th and the second one by December 31st. There will be some stragglers that will pay after year end for the 2022 taxes, but you want to keep that as low as possible. And then in every municipality, every township, you'll have people that go into arrears. Arrears being 2021 and prior taxes, which then you have as a council and management, the decision to make to go power of sale, how am I going to collect these taxes and that type of thing. Because don't forget, you're not only responsible for collecting the municipal taxes that you then use to spend on the township for infrastructure and providing safety and environmental and general government to your community, but you're also collecting the education taxes, okay, that are then submitted on behalf of your taxpayers, submitted to the various school boards that are represented in this township. So just keep that in mind as council taxes receivable, and it is something that I did talk with. We have had a number of talks with Donna over the past couple of months about processes that are being put in place for 2023 and beyond 2024 to bring that tax receivable down. When that number comes down, everyone, your bank account goes up. Okay, which is good, because one of the things as the council that you're dealing with is you have somewhere around $750,000 in municipal reserve funds that are really important for some initiatives that you have planned down the road. You want to make sure that you have that money in your bank account. So then we get to liabilities. So you'll see $186,000 in accounts payable. What is that? That represents all services and goods that were purchased in the last couple of months of 2022, but paid for in 2023. Okay, so that could be payroll for your staff. Okay, your 9, 10, 11 staff. It could be goods that were purchased in November, December of 2022, but then paid for January, February, March 2023, that type of thing. So it's all accrued liabilities and all trade payables of the municipality that relate to the calendar year 2022. You'll see deferred revenue and obligatory reserve funds. The $20,000 of deferred revenue, I'm not going to talk too much about. It represents a special purpose grant that was received a few years ago with regards to cannabis education in the community. And the 493 is a big one. That's money in your bank account, everyone. That's the, and again, I'll talk about it when I get to the notes. But that represents the unspent gas tax money. It represents your what we call NORDS. You may call it NORDS, but Northern Ontario Resource Development Support money, as well as your Community Building Fund and OSIF, which is the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. So that's all monies that's in your bank account. You've received it from different levels of government. You've just yet to spend it. Long-term debt, I had a talk with Donna and the mayor the other day. You have very little long-term debt as a municipality, which is a good thing. So if and when there is a large I know that you were talking about, is it not fire vehicles or fire trucks?
Trucks.
A truck. So when you have capital needs, that means building needs, road improvements, water and sewer, vehicles, computers, fixtures, etc. When those needs come up in Calvin, one of the things that you do, the first thing you do is you try to access grants, government grants. The second thing you do is you try to go and borrow the money. Okay, because you're only allowed as a municipality under the law in Ontario to borrow money to buy capital. You're not allowed to borrow money to pay for salary and to pay for period expenses, okay, ongoing budget items. So that's not allowed. You are allowed to borrow money to invest in infrastructure, which includes vehicles, computers, buildings, linear assets, which are water and sewer, roads, etc. So $71,000, and I suspect those two small loans will be paid off in the next 2 years. So you do have room to borrow. Landfill. The landfill, again, every couple of years, I'd like you to get a report, and I think we are getting one in 2024. Your CEO can update you on that.
Should have been completed by now, but we are planning to complete it in 2024.
So this is a big one as well. This is one that, again, you're responsible for a particular landfill. And why is it a liability? Well, it's a liability because at some point that landfill will become full. When it's full, you have the legal responsibility under the law in Ontario to cap it and care for it. And those costs can be significant. The capping of it in particular is probably about 3/4 of the liability to actually close it off, so it's safe. But then you have to monitor it. And the last report said we're going to monitor it for 10 years. I'd like to see you monitor it for 20 years as opposed to 10, based on Ontario ministry practices. But when you get that report, like I said, the bulk of the costs are actually to cap it itself. Then you have to monitor it to make sure there's no leaching or there's no exposure to any of the land around it. So that's $419,000. You do have in municipal reserves, you do have some money set aside right now. And again, that can change because municipal reserves are controlled by council. But that $419,000 is a liability that eventually will have to be paid by this township. Okay. Net financial assets, you're in a positive $280,000. That's a good thing. Okay, as council. So again, some municipalities I go to, that's negative. That number's in brackets. The province of Ontario, number is very negative. The government of Canada, that number is very, very negative. So that's the number you hear about. When you hear about $1.2 trillion because the federal government, that's that number right there. That means that their liabilities exceed their bank accounts, if you will, by $1.2 trillion. It used to be 600 billion before the pandemic, and then everyone I'm sure knows what happened in the last 5 years. Then you set out your non-financial assets, tangible capital assets, inventories, and prepaid expenses. So let me talk a little bit about each of them. Tangible capital assets is your infrastructure. So you can borrow to infrastructure. I need a new building. I need an upgrade to the community center, to the town hall, to the fire hall, whatever town municipal assets you own. Road work, etc., are all form part of tangible capital assets because you spend money in 2024, it should benefit you in 2025, 2026, 2027, etc. Inventory is just at the end of December. If I come out here on a spot check as the township auditor, you should be able to show me what you have. And it typically in smaller townships involves sand, salt, etc., getting ready for winter season. Okay, so what you'll do is you'll bulk acquire certain inventory supplies inventory, and then you'll utilize that in January, February, March, etc. Okay, touch wood, doesn't go into April. And again, so far, I suspect you've had a pretty decent snow season. Prepaid expenses, I expect this to be very small. That's anytime, say the insurance bill comes in and you guys pay it. Say it's $20,000 and you pay it in December, but it covers you to June. Well, 10,000 of that bill is prepaid. It's an asset for next year. Okay. Last year, there was a down payment on an asset, I believe, a truck that was bought in 2021, 2022. But the 7,400, that's more realistic as to where you should be for that type of asset. Now, how did you do? If you go to the next page. So that's where you were at December 2022. That gives you a flavor for the size of the township. How did you do in terms of, well, what revenues did I bring in and where did I spend the money? Is on page 5. I brought in taxation revenue of 1.4 million, which is what I budgeted. Okay, and you know that because you have the tax roll, you have the impact assessments, you have all this information, you have an idea. You always make the decision about, well, how much am I going to increase taxes by 2%, 3%, 7%, 8%, whatever the case may be, based on what the need is of Calvin. Now, I talked about it earlier, you are very dependent on one particular taxpayer, which is a challenge for Calvin. And that one particular taxpayer, I'm sure you've talked about, the management's aware of, and the whole community is probably aware of, is obviously the pipeline, which is a very large chunk of that taxation. But in addition to that, municipalities, and I used to teach for AMO and MFOA and all these organizations, I used to go down and talk to them and say, you've got to get away from being so dependent on property taxation revenue and think outside the box, what else can we generate for revenue so we can spend money to keep our taxpayers happy as it relates to roads, transportation and safety and OPP coverage and social and family services, making sure we're able to, spend money at, whether it's Castle Home or Algonquin Nursing Home or the health unit or whatever the case may be, all these different things that we have to do. Well, there's government grants. Always apply as much as possible for government grants. And that can be NOHFC, it can be FedNor, it can be through infrastructure, all the different infrastructure programs. A couple of years ago, what I called the Fidelity money came out, where all of you got a check. This council may not be aware of it, but the prior council will be aware that you got a check as it related to how we do innovation. How do we do things in Calvin? And it was a couple $100,000. So it's just being aware of what programs are out there that you can bring money into that can cover off some of your expenses. That's government transfers, okay, from other levels of government. Then, of course, you have user charges and other revenue. That's your interest income you make on your bank account or term deposits. That's user fees that are charged for, everything that is in the municipality. And that's very, very important. It's a different way, if you think about it, of taxing our community. But it's not based on a generic mill rate. It's based on a user. So it's based on a consumption. And it can be for blue box, for the environment. It can be for a cemetery. It can be for, water is a big example in a lot of communities. Okay. Is an example of a user charge. Penalties and fines, examples of user charges. Okay, so it's based on what someone does, not the property they own. And then you have your expenses. So you see 1,788,000, that middle column, that's your audited numbers. Okay, you budget for 1.8 million. And you budgeted to spend 1.8 million. You actually had expense of 1.9 million, but that's okay. That didn't mean that you went over budget. What the 1.9 million, it includes a whole bunch of what we call an accounting depreciation or amortization. You do not, I think you should, but I think still 40% of municipalities in Ontario don't budget for amortization. But again, if you listen to AMO, if you listen to municipal affairs, they're encouraging municipalities to budget for amortization. But amortization for you guys represents about 200 grand. Okay, that's in that 1.9 million of expenses. So you can back that out if you want. Amortization is, I bought a building 10 years ago for $1 million, and every year I expense a part of it. That's what it is. So it's not a cash expense, it's just depreciating an existing asset. Your other items though, again, everything from transportation to general government, protection, etc., are all where you spent the money. And in a minute, at the end of my presentation, I'll show you how you spent it. How much got spent on payroll, how much got spent on, actually buying materials, how much got spent on third-party contracts, and that type of thing. So you had a small deficit of $165,000, which represents a little less than 10% of your budget. A big chunk of that is created by amortization. Again, my preference in future years would be that number actually be a positive number, not a negative number. But again, there were a whole bunch of things in 2022 as you had a whole bunch of transitional changes to your staff, your leadership in terms of CAO, clerk, treasurer, etc., that has gone on the past couple of years. So there were some what I would call one-time or unusual expenses that certainly have flowed through the past couple of years. So I would expect that to get back to be positive as we head into 2024. If we go to the next page, I don't have too many comments on what's called the statement of changes in net financial assets. This is the number that, again, everyone reads about when you look at the province of Ontario and the feds and that type of thing. But for you guys, you actually improved your financial position in 2022 by $58,000. Okay, so if you think about it, you know, you were to the better. When I looked at your bank account, minus your liabilities, you actually had an improvement of 58,000 over the year before. Now, that could just as easily have swung the other way had you gone out and acquired some assets. So if you acquired that fire truck in 2022, as an example, then it would have flipped, right? So that's the problem with accounting. Accounting is literally Jan 1 to December 31st. So you can kind of fool your financial statements a little bit by doing something on January 1st of the following year. So just keep that in mind. The statement of cash flows on the next page, it's an important one. It just shows you again what happened to our bank account, and what, you know, as council, you have to be prepared to answer this if any of the taxpayers ask. How come our bank balance went up by $400,000? Well, it went up by that because A, we cashed in a GIC. That's an easy one. And B, we got a whole bunch of government money that we weren't yet ready to spend. Okay, that's OSIP, NORDS, gas tax, or whatever they're going to call it now, development monies. And again, that money will get invested in your great township in 2023 and 2024 as we move forward, because there are time limits to when those monies have to be spent. Your accounting policy starting on page 8, and then they go all the way to page, 11. I'm not going to go through them. They have not changed. So yes, you changed the audit firms. That doesn't mean you change your accounting. In Canada, the Public Sector Accounting Board, since before the pandemic or COVID-19, what we all call COVID-19, no significant accounting standards changed. So none of the way you account for your cash, your payables, your tangible capital assets, your revenue, etc., none of that changed over the past couple of years. There will be some significant changes in the next 5 years to how you report, but that was not the case in 2022 or 2023. The notes to your financials, there's a couple things I want to highlight. Note 1, that included in your $1 million bank account, $493,000 is unspent government money. Keep that in mind, please. Note 2, included in the $191,000 of monies owed to you, for the most part, is HST and a couple government grants that were outstanding at the end of the year. On the next couple of pages, how our capital assets that we can go borrow money for? What are the categories? Land and land improvements, which would include properties owned by the township. Township buildings, machinery and equipment, vehicles, and roads and bridges, which are linear assets, I call it, or linear infrastructure. So these 2 pages here show a continuity of what did you buy, what did you dispose of during these last 2 years, and how much did we amortize or depreciate those assets by. Note 4 on taxes receivable, I talked about already. You want that current taxes to come down a little bit. In other words, you don't want $147,000 owing to you. You want to collect. So for 2023, ideally, every taxpayer has paid you for 2023. It's not always going to be like that. You're going to have some people that will pay you a couple months after 2023. I know we're talking about 2022, but I'm just giving you an example. We're still collecting a few taxes now in January 2024 that relates to 2023 and in some cases before. So you do want to bring that down. If you bring that balance down and you manage it well, then your cash goes up, and you've got your reserve funds, and you're able to make some strategic decisions as a council. If you go to the next page, note 6, those are those 2 loans. So you have a very favorable loan with Ontario Infrastructure and Lands Corp, $50,000, and you're paying that down. I think it's $20,000 a year, if I'm not mistaken. Oh yeah, you make 2 payments of $10,000 a year. And then you've got a small equipment loan with Caterpillar Finance. The landfill is in note 7, and all the disclosure around the landfill that I talked about already. And again, please make sure let's get an update to that in terms of capacity, like how many more years do I have left? What's the percentage based on cubic meters that I've utilized of that landfill already? And what do I have left to use before I actually have to cap it and care for it? And then, of course, go find another landfill. Note 8's an interesting one, again, based on a commitment, and I think this got put into your notes last year and I left it. Not 100% comfortable, I understand it, to be honest, but there, I guess, was some type of commitment made to the Algonquin Nursing Home, which is in Mattawa, adjacent to the hospital, for $3.8 million by a group of townships. I think Papineau's in there, Calvin, assuming Mattawa, maybe Mattawan.
That's correct.
And in terms of making what I would call a municipal contribution to that capital project. Years ago, we had the same thing. I don't know if you guys remember this when North Bay built the regional hospital. There was some municipal contributions that were municipal commitments, pardon me, that were pledges, if you will, made for the actual capital construction of that $300 million asset at the time. So we're going to continue monitoring that. Again, if BDO, I'm assuming BDO is going to continue at least for 2023, and then you guys can decide what to do. But you need an auditor appointed, so I'm assuming BDO will do 2023. We're going to continue to monitor that Note 8 and better understand that agreement in terms of, well, what is our share? You know, is it based on per capita, head count, population, et cetera, of that particular obligation? And is it a legal obligation, or was it what I call a constructive obligation? Was it a promise made by council? Note 9 is a breakdown that I talked about already. This is the unspent government money that's in your bank account. So you have some, the biggest items are the Canada Community Building Fund, 244,000. The what I call OSIF money, or the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, of 100,000. And then of course your NORDS money of 120,000. And again, having a plan to make sure that those monies are actually redeployed, they're actually spent. So they're not the best interest of our taxpayers in our bank account. That need to be actually spent on whether it's transportation, infrastructure, whatever the terms of those government grants were. And again, I suspect that is happening in 2023 as we head into 2024. Note 10, accumulated surplus. This is important for mayor and council to understand. So if someone asks you, what do we have in our township as reserves, then you can answer them that we have 761,000. Now, you might say, Dean, if I take my bank account minus the government grants that are sitting in there, I don't have 761,000. And that's true. But you would have that if you collected all your taxes. So collect your taxes, you'll have all your reserves and reserve fund. In the meantime, you've borrowed from it a little bit, which is not unusual. By the way, municipalities do borrow from the reserve funds because it's cheaper than having a operating line of credit at the bank. A couple of years ago, you could get an operating line of credit at the bank and they charge you very little. Now, we live in a world of a bit of a more higher interest rates. Still not average interest rates, by the way, over the last 50 years, but certainly higher. And I know that John could certainly talk to that. But you have 761,000. Who decides that 148 is working funds, which is what you call tax stabilization fund, general operating fund, whatever. That's a working fund. That 148, it really has not been specific to any particular purpose. But councils of prior councils did allocate some money, set aside some money for roads, landfill, and fire departments. Those were some big chunks of money for one-time costs that were going to be incurred at some point in the future. Okay, so we do want to make sure we have that money in the bank when it comes time to invest in those things. The landfill's an interesting one. I wouldn't, as your auditor, I wouldn't have anything in here for landfill because you already have it set up as a liability. So next time you're talking, remember that I said that ultimately it's up to you to decide, but you don't technically need to have a landfill reserve fund when you already have a landfill liability sitting there for $436,000. Like you already know what that obligation is. So there's no sense. Now, all this does is just forces you to keep that money in the bank account. Note 11 is just common public sector disclosure, as well as note 12. The different thing about note 12 is that you're qualifying full-time and maybe part-time employees, but in a lot of townships, the staff contribute to what's called OMERS, which is this municipal pension plan, one of the largest pension plans in Canada. In your case, I think it's a group RSP plan, right? It's a large insurance company. So there's just a disclosure on how much you contributed on their behalf. And then finally, everyone, on the last 2 pages, I promised you I would show you not where money was spent of the $1.9 million, $1.7 million, but how it was spent. So what was it spent on? And you can see in 2022 that of your $1.9 million budget, 200,000 was amortization. So just ignore that. So really I spent 1.7 million. Well, of that, 540 was on our staff. I'm on page 23, everyone, page 23, the one that's landscape. You can see that 468,000 was spent on materials, 320 on external transfers, So that's your transfers to the DSAB and the North Bay Prairie Sound District Health Unit at Castle Home or Board of Management, whatever it's called now, et cetera. And a little bit of interest on long-term debt because you have very little long-term debt. And that shows you the where, or sorry, that shows you the how the monies were spent in 2022. So despite the fact that we had different types of accounting ledgers and processes over the past couple of years that are being trued up, there will be a management letter that will come over the next couple of weeks that did identify with management, you know, some areas of recommendations and improvements. We had a very nice discussion with your new CAO, as well, CEO clerk, Donna, who we have some experience working with in the past, as well as your mayor over the past week. So this letter will come in the next couple of weeks, and it does relate to everything from, you know, we have to make sure when an invoice comes in to Calvin, it gets approved by the appropriate person. We have to make sure when money goes out of your bank account, it's signed off by 2 people, not 1. When an electronic funds transfer is done out of your bank account, it has to be signed off or authorized and initiated and authorized by 2 people, not 1. But, you know, just some normal, the bank should be reconciled on a regular basis. We should have a canned, proven software in our township that we're using to track, because the better information you get, the better you're able to do budgets, right? And the better you're able to go back to the taxpayers and say, okay, taxes are going to go up. You're going to have that discussion at some point. Taxes are going to have to go up by, say, 6%, hypothetically. And you've got to be able to explain to the taxpayers why that is. And if you don't have good accounting information, you're not going to be able to explain that. So I have a couple comments on this presentation, but right now I'll go back to the mayor and see if council has any questions on anything that I presented to date.
Right, so does anyone have any comments or questions for Mr. DeGarrett?
I do. Great presentation, very clear and easy to understand. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very good presentation. And one thing I just wanted to touch on was the that landfill, the distinction you made of having the liability pointed out, but not have the reserve for it. That just kind of confused me a little bit. So where does, like, if you have identified 440,000 and this future point will be required, at what point you're gonna have to start stacking up that money somewhere?
Yeah, no, very well said, for sure. So when I look at your financial position, you know, I see your financial, if you go back to page, great question, John. When I go back to page 4, everyone, you'll see that you have $1.4 million in the bank. Okay, which is your $1,050,000 in the bank plus your taxes. Let's assume you collected all your government grants, your HST, and your property taxes. You got $1.472 million in the bank. You have $1.1 million in liabilities, including that landfill. So technically, you do have that money set aside already. But to John's point, to the councillor's point, you know, what about my $750,000 in reserve funds? Okay, so if you back that out, then you do have a shortfall and you do need to start saving for that. What my recommendation is that, you know, you don't need to call it a reserve fund, but what you do need to do is you do need to, it'd almost be great, you know, in an ideal world, to actually transfer money from the general account to what I call a landfill account every year and just keep it in that bank account, as opposed to calling it a municipal reserve. That was my comment. Okay, but, you know, the other way of approaching it is just saying, no, what we're going to do is we're going to track it through a municipal reserve. So every year I know I can, to discount to your councillor's point, I can build up the $400,000 over the next 17 years. Then I have it. It's in my bank account. It's in municipal reserves. I haven't touched it. And I'm actually able to then cap the landfill and have enough money set aside to care for it for 20 years. And that's perfectly acceptable as well. Okay, it's a cool way of doing it. I'm just saying you don't need to do that. You know, it's not required that you have a reserve fund for that particular item, because every other item in your municipal reserves is not set up as a liability. Do you understand what I mean? It's not already recognized in your financial statements.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
It's a bit of a detailed question, so I don't know if there's an
Nope.
answer right now, but on the taxes owing, we're responsible to collect and pay the school tax. Right? Now, on those taxes owing, does the school tax, has it already been paid? Does that make sense? Like, they're gonna want their money. And I don't know if we have the detailed answer to this right now.
I don't, but I'm sure.
If so, then, you know, that's a further, I guess it would just be same liability, but. You know, are they waiting still for their payments, or have we paid them?
We pay them twice a year.
We pay them twice a year regardless of whether we collect it.
That's correct.
So
Correct.
part of this money owing has already been paid out for the school tax.
Yes, there is no payable to the school boards at the end of December.
Okay. That's my
And that's a
question.
very good question. And again, it's based on, you know, my municipality that goes on the cash basis or accrual basis. I think you're legally obligated to do it on the accrual basis. In other words,
So,
as you levy the tax to the customer, as you levy that bill to the taxpayer, you're setting up you're debiting AR, you're setting up a receivable, you're crediting municipal revenue, and you're crediting payable to school boards. And then, like Donna said, you're actually paying the school boards. So
you don't
you have the
believe that
risk.
we can legally withhold the payment until.
I don't think you can.
Okay, I'm just curious. 'Cause
Yeah, it's a very
that's
good question.
loss for us, right?
Right.
But you say it's a loss, but yes, you are exactly right, Counselor, and
Because now we have to collect their money.
that's right,
Yeah.
and yours.
As
And
Ours as well.
But the school board doesn't have the legal ability that you have. You can do power sales, so you can, you have the right to go out there and under the municipal act, do whatever you need to do, whereas the school board can't, right? They can't do that.
Okay.
It's a tough decision, you know, but it's a
Makes sense to me now.
very good question.
Any other questions? I just have one, on page 9, you talk about reserves and reserve funds and say that certain amounts as approved by council are set aside by reserves. So then if you go to page 19, the reserve funds, there was $73,991 taken out of the reserves, which is the working funds under item 2 on, on page 19. Sorry, I've been going through this.
note 10 2.
Yeah, note 10-2. The working funds were $222,874 in 2021, and they dropped to $148,883. So that means $73,991 were taken out of reserves.
Yep.
Is that something that council would approve, or is that just something that would be done to balance the budget, if you will?
No, it 100% is something council has done.
Okay,
Sorry, any movement in these accounts in 10-2 has to be done by council.
all right,
The balancing number is up above. You'll see something called general surplus. That decrease, Mr. Mayor, that is the balancing. That's the accounting balance. So that's 48,501 that you've yet to put into a reserve fund.
right.
Okay,
So,
but any movement down below, increase or decrease has to be by way of council motion.
so this would then just be moved into the general ledger as balancing the statement. So in other words, if you have a $73,000 shortfall or 74,000, you're just taking the money out and
Yeah.
balancing the budget with that.
Yes, and you won't see it on page. It's not an item that's allowed to go on
Page
page
4.
5,
Or
page 5.
Yeah,
So you're not gonna see on page 5 revenues and expenses and then, you know, the reserve fund revenues or reserve fund expenses. That's not allowed. What you have is you have a deficit of 165,000 and you say, well, how did you finance that? Well, council approved that by saying we're gonna use prior year reserve funds. Okay, that's how that was financed. Now, it's not ever gonna be the exact number because council can't predict what the final, you know, deficit is. That's why you have that general surplus number. But, you know, you have every right to make a decision. That's the decision you make when you look at next year. 2024 is a good example, and you say, you know what, we're gonna need to spend 1.8 million. We know we're gonna bring in 100,000 in user fees and other revenue. We know we're gonna bring in 200,000 of government grants. That means that we need 1.5 million in property taxation. Well, we know what we get from, you know, blah, blah, blah. That means it's gonna have to be a 11% increase in property tax in our mill rate. Because we know what the impact assessment is. Well, the taxpayers are gonna say, that's a little too much for us to handle. go use some of your reserves, like that'd be a comment you get as a, I was gonna say a politician, as a mayor, councilman, you may hear that from the community. So then you could say, okay, well, we're going to, in order to balance our budget, we're gonna draw on the working fund reserve for $90,000 or whatever you need. And that's what you do by motion. Yep. Now, there's gonna be years where you know you had a good year, you had some efficiency, your spending didn't go quite what you thought, you had a milder winter, blah, 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 blah. Then you can actually put into reserve.
Right.
Because you know what I mean? So you know that you actually over collected from the property taxpayer. So I dump that money into the working fund reserve by way of motion.
We knew that we had to purchase a truck this year. And that's going to be, say, $400,000. There's $145,000 in the roads reserve. In our conversation, you had said that it would be better to borrow most of that money or use that road reserve to cover.
Well, I wouldn't use road reserve to buy a fire truck.
No, a road truck.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was to buy a fire truck. Okay, sorry. So if you're, okay, so I've got money set aside in roads, you know, for a fire truck. Then the decision is, again, 5 years ago, I would have said, looking at your financial statements, go borrow the whole thing.
Right.
Keep that roads reserve in place, invest it, right, in a GIC or whatever, or in a savings account or whatever, for something else that you might need in roads, and borrow the money. Now, you go to Scotiabank, how much is it gonna be to buy a roads truck? Like, what's the cost of capital? Well, it's gonna be 8.5%. Yeah, that's tough, because that 8.5% has to be covered off by the taxpayer, you know, over the next 5 years, and they're only gonna loan it to you for a 5-year period. So I suspect what council will do is just go back and forth and use some of that 100. I wouldn't use all of it, no, but I would use some of it. I might put $100,000 down and see if you can borrow 300,000 at the bank, get the best rate possible as a township,
Right.
because you're a low risk borrower. You should have a pretty decent cost of capital based on your financial statements, and then of course in your budget going forward, your interest expense is going to be a little bit higher.
Right.
Okay, that you got to get from the taxpayer.
Right.
So all you're doing is, if you use the reserve funds now, then you save the taxpayer a little bit of money on interest expense, but then, you know, what do you do next time you need something in roads? You know, you can only go to.
Is there a legislated direction as to how much you have to keep in reserves? Or, I mean, obviously, you, as a township, you couldn't just go and spend the entire $148,000 in the working funds.
No, I mean, certainly my rule of thumb for municipalities is between 3 and 6 months worth of expenses. So for you guys are roughly $1.7 million. So you should have about anywhere between 400 and 800,000 in reserves. You have 750.
Okay.
So your reserve funds are healthy for a municipality your size. What scares me is the pipeline.
Right.
That the reliance on that property tax revenue is significant. If you assume that's going to be in perpetuity, then the other thing I'll say to you is your ARL, your annual repayment limit, okay, for borrowing, you could go and borrow millions of dollars right now. That you have that much room, right? Because it's 25% of your tax base. So 25% for you guys, that'd be, let's say, I don't know, $400,000. You're allowed to make $400,000 in principal interest payments every year. Imagine how much debt that is.
Yes.
That's your cap on how much you can borrow. You have a $71,000 loan that you make payments of what, $3,000-4,000 a year on, or a month, or whatever it is. So you have this huge, and don't get me wrong, get the best rate of interest, but like I said, you know, 3 years ago, I would say it was a bit of no-brainer. I would say go borrow the money. Borrow the money. It's you know, keep your reserve funds there and use that to offset other items in roads that you need. But now I'm saying, well, maybe it's good to, you know, it's like any of us that go buy a car right now, you know, maybe we put 5,000 down just to reduce the amount of interest we pay over the next couple of years. I think the taxpayer would appreciate that.
So our general reserve fund has only gone up $2,000 over the last, from 81 to 82. 81. From 2021 to 2022, we've only increased our reserve funds by from 759,000 to 761,000. So 2,000.
That's correct. Yep.
that strange? Is that out of whack? Is that? Like, as an auditor, what? Does that,
Well, actually, it has not, because you have to factor in up above the general surplus. So your actual, everyone, is gone down. It didn't go up by 2,000. It went down by, I don't know, 89,000 or whatever it is. So, because you see how the general surplus went from 137 to 48?
okay,
Yeah, that's a decrease of $80,000, $90,000.
so is that something we need to be concerned about?
No,
No?
it's something that when I said to you earlier, your accounting deficit of 160, I don't want to see that. I wouldn't expect to see that again. And so I expect it to be a positive number. When it's a positive number, those numbers there will actually increase.
Okay.
But you have to be very clear, right now, on using my rule of thumb of 3 months worth of expenses sitting in reserves is healthy. For you guys, 3 months worth of reserves, what would we say is 450,000? Let's say you're at 750,000. So you have room to, you could easily put $100,000 down on that new truck, that new vehicle, borrow the rest, and you would not feel, you wouldn't feel the pain of that in your budget.
Okay.
That's what I would do.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? No? Donna, do you have any comments? No? All right, you have something else?
Yeah, the last thing is this. So I'm not going to read through it, but we're required under the Canadian Assurance Standards to provide this to you. So what we usually do is provide this to an audit committee. Now that's for non-for-profits, private companies, public companies. I'm more and more I'm finding municipalities establishing audit committees. Audit committees allow for a frank discussion. Audit committees typically, they're not open to the public because, you know, you can talk about things that under the Municipal Act, you can't talk about in an open meeting, such as if there's legal matters, HR matters, there are certain things that you have to, that are closed. So when you don't have an audit committee, then this report goes to the full mayor and council. And it just talks about independence. So you must, under the law, hire an auditor that's independent. I can't have any relationships I can have a relationship with someone that lives in this community. I can't have any relationships, financial or otherwise, with any decision makers, your CEO, your clerk treasurer, your members of council, etc. Do you understand what I mean? So, you know, if Donna was my sister, I can't do the audit. Make sense?
Mhm.
If your audit fee was so high that it represent more than 10% of my total practice, I'm not objective. Because I don't want to lose you as a client. Yeah, I'm giving you some examples. So in here, it talks about independence. It talks about materiality. The fact that we used, I think, 2% of your revenue. So somewhere around $34,000 we used for materiality. Meaning that we look at all your we look at a sample of your transactions. If we find an error that's less than $30,000, I can still sign a clean report. If we find one higher than 30, or in aggregate, if we find errors that are higher than $30,000, I cannot sign a clean report. But you understand what I'm saying? And we're allowed to go anywhere up to 2 or 4% of your budget. I don't like that. I like to stick down to like somewhere around 2%. So 2% of 1.7 million is what? $34,000. That's where we stick around there. The other thing that this talks about is any disagreements with management during the course of the audit. Now, obviously, we were, you know, most of the audit got conducted with Donna, which was, again, I think a very good hire by the township, which allowed for a free-flowing access of information. Getting it piecemeal from this person is a challenge. That it's not conducive to an audit. As a matter of fact, we would just pull out and just say, you know, call us back when you're ready. And you don't want that because you don't want you don't want your ratepayers, your taxpayers in the community saying, well, you know, where's our stuff? So these are all things we've talked about before. I think you're on the right track moving forward. I'm hoping to get in and see you guys again in April with the 2023 numbers. That would be ideal. Then it's fresh in your mind. And we can kind of move forward in that regard. There were a number of adjustments that had to get made to your numbers in 2022. Again, a lot of it was you know, the result of where you guys were at with the quality of your general ledger accounts and the movement between different people and bodies in that position. And the other thing it talks about in the report is it talks about this whole idea of sustainability that everyone's talking about. And I love Calvin, and I've said this before, I think I said this in Bonfield and a couple other places. I'd love to, why not be township that says, you know what, we're really going to embrace this and we're going to talk about it, like on your website and different things that you do in our community. And sustainability is ESG. It's that environmental sustainability, social sustainability, governance sustainability. How effective is our mayor and council? That's good governance. What are our hiring practices and supplier practices as a township? Are we biased in any way against someone because of their race, color, religion, sexual orientation, etc.? But these are all things that public companies are going to be measured by this now. I believe governments are going to start to get measured by this going forward to the future. Okay, it will start, and it's going to start with provinces. I guarantee it. Provinces are going to start talking about this. If you go on BDO Canada's website right now, you'll see our whole position paper on sustainability, what we do. We've actually, you know, it's as simple as curtailing the number of air miles some people are doing business travel. Or if you're doing business travel, then you're buying the equivalent, what's it called? Carbon credit. So I had to go to London, England for a business trip for whatever reason. But you know what I did? I bought back the carbon credit as a result of what I did on that flight. So those are the types of things that are talked about. Do we have a good governing board of the township? Yes or no? Do we have good practices on who we hire and who we deal with? Yes or no? And how responsible are we to the environment in terms of, you know, either harm or betterment? So it's an audit standard now. That's why I'm talking to you about it as a CPA. I'm not an expert in this area at all, but it ties into good quality of the township because in terms of how you do things. You know, I want to do things in the best way possible. I'm a believer, and I know when I leave here, you guys may snicker and tease me a little bit and say that's naive, but I'm a believer if we're doing all those right things, then people come. Families want to be part of that in Calvin, or a business may want to open in Calvin, if that's part of your goals. I don't know if that's part of your goals, or maybe your goal is to shrink and have some people leave. I don't know. But I know one entity that we want to stay here, being the pipeline. But certainly, those are some things, again, as a mayor and council, you know, it'd be kind of neat to, you know, how do we want to be known? That's why I almost wish that this topic would have come out a few years ago when that famous check came out. I don't know who the mayor was back then, with the Fidelity check, they call it, which was, you know, it's a whole story behind that. But when it came out, because, you know, how innovative can we get in Calvin? What can we do to be different? Because it was a couple $100,000. What are we gonna do in Calvin with that? And then now I think it's a big chunk of it must have got spent over the past couple of years.
It was all spent.
It was all spent, okay, because I didn't see it in your reserve funds, but what were some of the things that we did that it shouldn't have just benefited the community for 1 year? It should have been something to put in place to benefit the community for years to come, right? In terms of how we operate as a township. Anyway, there's some other materials in there, you know, with regards to that. Other than that, it's certainly saying thank you. The first year doing taking over and doing an audit is painful. It takes too long. It's a pain in the butt. Blah 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 blah. We try to make it as, I don't know, painless as possible, but it's a lot to dig into. And the way audit standards are now, it's much more like I've been doing this for 32 years now, and it's much more serious now than it's ever been. And that's because everyone does things differently. Like when I first started auditing, there was no, you know, we were naive when it came to fraud or someone stealing money. There was no such thing as an EFT or a transfer that didn't, like, well, I used to count checks. That's the way I first started auditing. I'd look at canceled checks. I'd look at every canceled check in a month. And was it signed by the right people? You know, blah, blah, blah. Now there's so many different ways of doing things. It's just become very, very, much more complex than it was. And that's why it is time to develop a retirement plan in my case. And, but not for a couple of years. Any comments on this part of the presentation? Again, I'm happy the council at any time, you know, you have a right and say, you know what, can we have the auditor come to a meeting? So you have every right to do that. I have not used that. I mean, I did the audit for the city of North Bay for 15 years, and I never used that where I actually have a right to show up to any meeting I want and be part of the, you know, the agenda, blah, 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 blah. That's what the law says in Ontario. I've never actually done that before. What I've always depended on is for mayor and council to say, you know what, we wouldn't actually mind hearing and getting a second opinion on a particular initiative that we're looking to do. So please always keep that in mind.
Well, thank you very much for your report. It was very enlightening. And I just want to state that this council wasn't really too terribly involved in the 2022 process because we really started in, well, we were sworn in on November the 15th, 2022, and probably didn't do much of anything but training until the end of the year. 2023 is going to be as challenging, I think, as 2022 was, I'm sure. There were lots of things that we weren't aware of. For example, one thing that you've brought to my attention was when I looked at all of that money that's sitting there, it's sort of extra money, which is those government grants. I understand now that we are in a situation where those grants are for some road improvements. And that will come up in 2024, so it'll be, you know, the opposite of having that money sitting there. It'll be an expenditure in that point in time, and we have to do that because that's why we receive those funds in advance. So there's lots to learn, and you know we can certainly benefit from the experience of going through this as you have, and it's been very enlightening. Thank you very much. Are there any other comments from anyone? No?
I just want to say, Dean, thank you so much to staff. Josh and Corey were great to work with. And as you know, I only began in August of 2023. So 2022 is completely new to me. I didn't know anything about. And so pulling documents together for them was a challenge at times, and very patient staff, very helpful, even up to today. It's been a pleasure working with them. And as you say, we've had some experience working together, and Dean can attest to the fact that I will be the first one to say, let's invite Dean back, because I really believe in the power of an auditor to educate all people at all times and any time. And we should take advantage of the knowledge and experience that they can bring to the table when council members who are lay people, and for the most part, never accountants, have a lot of questions and should have a lot of questions of me and of the auditor always, so that we all know where we're sitting and where we're standing, and so we can learn more and to do better for our community. So thank you.
Thank you.
All of your staff and to you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Ducaire, if you'd like to exit so that you're driving home before it's too dark out there, please feel free.
And I go back the way I came, right? Like,
Well, just make the first lap at the fire hall, and that'll take you about 6:30. Yes.
either way, it was pretty. Yeah. Thank you.
Beautiful presentation, Dean. Like, you know your job. You're getting better. Say hi to David Richardson, eh?
I will.
David for 35 years.
Great as awesome. Great as awesome.
So I would just like to call that to a vote. Therefore be accepted that we accept the report of BDO. Could all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. I vote in favor as well. The next item on the resolution is resolution number 2024-22. Therefore be it resolved that the Council of the Corporation of the Municipality of Calvin approves to extend the BDO auditing services until the completion of the 2023 fiscal audit. So I need to move in a seconder. Councillor Morton moves and seconded by Councillor Latimer. Discussion. Councillor Morton. Councillor Latimer, any discussion? No?
Oh, great idea.
Yes, it's due in 3 months' time.
There you go.
So then I'll call that to a vote. All those in favor? And Nadine, you're a no?
I'm in favor.
Oh, you're in favor? So that's carried. I'm in favor as well. Carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is Bylaw 2024-09 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council or confirmatory bylaw. Did I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councilor Manson, Councilor Morton seconded. So therefore be it resolved that bylaw 2024-09 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council. All those in favor? And I'm in favor as well, so that is carried. And we have an adjournment bylaw, if I can just pull it out. They're stuck together. There you go. Bylaw 2024-24 resolution, sorry. Yeah, we did it on confirmatory. So resolution 2024-24 is an adjournment resolution. I need a mover and a seconder, Councilor Morton, seconded by.
Second, whatever.
Well, I saw Councilor Manson first, so we'll go with Councilor Morton and then Councilor Manson. That the council for the corporation municipality of Calvin now be adjourned at 7:17. All those in favor? Thank you very much. I'm in favor as well, so that is carried. And the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks for coming out. Enjoy your holiday, Dan.
Good night. It's just Vladimir.
Let's go to the next. Like that, a little different. Yeah, they can all money or rooms. Yeah, yeah.